Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. Join me as we have a real-life discussion on how to change your life by changing your thoughts. Remember, question everything, trust yourself, and find your truth. Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. My name is Sloan Fremont, and I'm your host. Today, I want to share some thoughts on becoming aware of our thoughts. I remember years ago when I first heard the statement that you don't have to believe everything that you think. You don't have to believe everything that you think. I couldn't believe that when I first heard it. I just wouldn't. I was like, that's not true. That can't be true. If I think it, it must be true, right? That was an assumption I had growing up. That was something that I believed to be true. And so I had believed up until that point in my life that everything I thought was true. And as you can imagine, that led to a very difficult and very hard way of, I think, going through life, because I literally believed everything I thought. And most of the things that I thought were not good. They were not positive. At that point, I didn't understand how to do the type of work I've been doing over the past, 5 years that I've been sharing on the show. It was all new to me. And I finally got to a point where I couldn't live like that anymore, which I've discussed numerous times on the show. And so this idea of you don't have to believe everything that you think, I finally gave in, I guess you would say, and decided to start thinking that there's a possibility that that might be true. And so over the years, as I've dug into this more and I've learned more about myself and about, the journey that we're all on, I have found so much freedom and power in that statement that you don't have to believe everything that you think, because often it felt like to me that my thoughts just came. They just came and they were just there and I had no control over them. And sometimes the thoughts were really fast and really frantic and caused a lot of pain and anxiety. And sometimes the thoughts, maybe every now and then, were good or positive thoughts, but those kind of went away really fast and were replaced by those anxious or more fearful thoughts. And so being willing to believe that I didn't have to believe all of my thoughts was probably one of the bigger steps in changing my life, because it allowed me to see a different perspective. It allowed me to really start to ask, okay, if I don't have to believe this, then what else can I believe? Like, what else is out there? If my thoughts aren't true, then what else can I explore and find and understand and really make my own truth, right? Decide for myself what is true. And so there's a lot of freedom in that. There was a lot of release and relief in that as well. So I've mentioned on my Telegram channel that I've been doing a course. It's called Ever Better Life. And a big part of this course is just about what I just talked about our thoughts and really understanding the process that we go through when we think thoughts. Our thoughts are running all the time, constantly in our mind, and really being able to understand that process and break it apart is the focus of this course. So for this episode today, I wanted to share my thoughts on that with you, what I'm learning from that, in the hopes that you'll find some things in here in this conversation that will help you as well. But before we get into that today, just a couple of reminders. If you are not in the Telegram channel, please join us. We have a great group in the channel, lots of conversation going on there. You can find the link in the show notes to the Telegram channel. It's called Create What You Speak, just like the show. And also don't forget about the Create What You Speak Academy. You can take a look at createwhatyouspeak.com. And there is where you'll find all of my courses. I do have a free personal awakening map that, if you haven't gotten that yet, it's a 2-pager. It's a really easy way to start to think about the life that you want to live and start creating that. So check that out at createwhatyouspeak.com. All right. So back to this topic of becoming aware of our thoughts and really starting to get a handle on them and have more control over the way we think about things and the things that we think about. So the first thing I want to do is share with you something that they brought up in this course called the life loop. And this is the process that how they explain it, that your thoughts really happen. how your thoughts happen and what that leads to. And so what they've designed here is that really you start out with what you're focusing on. So what you're focusing on leads to what you feel leads to what you behave. And then it goes through this loop of, what you see in your reality and what you filter on and what you notice and so on. But focusing is really, and one of the things he said in the course was that focusing is having a conversation with your reality. And I really love that because we're doing that all day, right? No matter what we're doing, whatever we're focused on, we're having a conversation with our reality. So that conversation may be a positive conversation. The conversation may be a negative conversation, but either way, we're having this conversation with our reality and we're having this energetic exchange with the universe. And we're really directing how our life is going to go. So if you're focused on something that causes you pain or makes you feel sad or is something that's really, not a good feeling for you, the positive thing is that you can change that because you have the control over that. And it seems for most of us, I can definitely speak for myself about myself on this, that we place a lot of emphasis on aspects of our lives that we can't control. So we place a lot of emphasis and a lot of our focus on things that we have no control over. This happens really easily when we consume content, otherwise known as news, right? Whatever you want to call news. When you start to consume that information, there's a lot of things in that you can't control. So things happening in other parts of the world, decisions being made by people other than yourself. Weather events that are happening, that again, we have no control over. And we seem to get swept up in these kinds of things, this information that we process. And it's really easy, as we all know, to become bogged down in that, to feel the injustice of it, or to feel like the hopeless feelings, whatever it is. And so consuming that over and over and being drip fed with that generally negative information, whether you're listening to alternative or reading alternative news or not, all of that kind of information that you really have no control over is one of the ways that our focus starts to wander. It wanders around, right? It starts wandering and it goes out of the territory maybe of where you want it to be. And it's very easy then for that focus to continue to wonder, right? So you're on a path you're thinking about something, or you've consumed something that is happening halfway across the world that you have no control over. And then you start to think of the other things maybe that are equally as whatever the feeling you're feeling, right? Negative, sad, why is this happening? This kind of stuff. And when we do this, when we let our focus get out of control or like out of the bounds where we would like it to be, it's really easy for these negative patterns to come in where we start to feel really bad, and then we behave in a really, negative way as a result. And because that's all we can see when we're in that negative space, or in that where our focus has been so not on the thing that we want, it's easy to get out of it's easy to let it go, and it keeps going, or it's kind of like it just blows out like a cloud or something. Like it gets bigger and bigger. And then before you know it, it's like, that's all you're focused on, right? Is everything negative, negative, negative. And I know I did this a lot in the past couple of years. Like I can remember there were times when I was, I think this was when everything was still locked down. It's hard to remember. It seems like all that time went together, but I can remember sitting on the couch and consuming Telegram, for hours and hours at a time, on a Saturday, right? Not really a lot to do. And just sitting there and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and consuming this information and wondering and going down all these rabbit holes, right? Maybe you did something the same, and you can relate to this, but going down these rabbit holes and my focus was so far out of control. It was I was letting it go everywhere and anywhere. And when it was doing that, it was like when I would come back to reality, right? I would come back and put the phone down for a minute and be like, what just happened here, right? I went on this journey, this focus journey of all these things that I didn't want to know about, that were not beneficial or helpful to me in any possible way. But yet I allowed myself several hours of this, to do this for several hours. And I can remember after that feeling very much drained and tired and what just happened here? And then looking at the clock and being like, oh my God, like I just wasted like 4 hours and I'm still sitting here with like nothing to show for it. Why did I do this? Right. So maybe you can relate, maybe you've done something similar. And then this is really easy to do like before bed, right? Like maybe you're kind of tired, but not really tired. So you pick up your phone and you start the scrolling. That's like one of the worst times to do that, because you get totally wrapped up into it, and 2 or 3 hours are gone and you've gone to bed way later than you wanted to, and it starts this chain reaction for your next day of like having a shitty day, right? So when we stop doing this kind of stuff, when we stop like letting our focus run wild and just having no bounds on it, we start to learn how we start to pull it back in, right? And then we can start to think about it from the perspective of, okay, this focus, when I'm focusing out on all this stuff that isn't good for me or doesn't feel good to me, makes me actually feel worse. Okay, let me bring it back home. And what do I want to start focusing on, right? Like, what do I want to start paying attention to, or what feels good to focus on? Because when we're also way out of bounds and we're focusing on all these things that don't feel good, we tend to want to control things, or we tend to want to try to make things happen almost as like a response to the feeling out of control of what we've been focusing on. So we put a lot of energy into that. We put a lot of energy and effort into trying to make things happen, or I don't know, it's almost like we try to make up for the things that we feel like that we don't have control over, right? So we start to try to control other areas of our life. And as many of you have probably experienced, that doesn't work. It causes a lot of pain and suffering and heartache and a lot of other things. And it's so draining. It's so like not a good use of our energy or our time or even our focus. So when we start to get more intentional and more conscious of our focusing and where it's going, that's when we can start to see that internal change, right? Because we're focusing on things that are beneficial to us. In the course, they use the phrases resourceful versus unresourceful. So when you're focusing on something that's resourceful, obviously that's something that makes you feel good, that has some sort of benefit to you. When you focus on something that's unresourceful, that's when you're focusing on things that make you feel like shit or that have no value in your life. And when you start to have that awareness of what your focus is, like, am I focusing on something that's helping me, or am I focusing on something that's hindering me or making me feel terrible? You start to take the control of your focus. You start to put bounds on it. You stop letting it just outside of the fences and going wild. And you start to have a little more control over what you're paying attention to. And when you do that, you'll notice when you change your focus, you'll notice that you start to feel different, and as a result, you'll behave different. And so that's one of the big things in the course that they talk about in the life loop, is this focus, and which leads to how you feel, which leads to how you behave. And there's a lot of other steps in there, but for today, I just want to keep it on the topic of really being aware of your focus. And so when you start paying attention to your focus, focusing on things that feel more resourceful, that feel better to you, you'll start to see that you feel better. And as a result, you behave differently. And so I wanted to share also an example from my own life of what I've noticed about myself when I started paying attention to my focus. So one of the things that I've noticed about myself recently is when I get annoyed about something, the annoyance seems to last for a long time. And it's very draining for me. And I start to have these conversations with myself that are not resourceful. They do not feel good. And the annoyance gets way out of bounds. It gets way out of where it originally started with just being annoyed. Because yes, we're all going to be annoyed. Obviously, I'm not thinking that I'm going to eliminate annoyance, right? And even with anything that we're talking about here, I mean, the goal of this is not, like with focusing, the goal is not to eliminate the emotion. The goal is to start to become aware of what we're doing so that we can start having more control over that. But we're still going to feel all the emotions of being a human, right? So that's not what I'm saying here. But when I started to realize, okay, so back to what I was saying about my feeling annoyed, what I noticed about myself was like that when I was annoyed about something, I couldn't let it go. And here's an example. So last week there was, a work meeting was supposed to be, in the morning on a Friday, and it got moved to the afternoon. And I was really annoyed by this because obviously who wants to have a work meeting on a Friday afternoon? And I don't know, I was annoyed throughout the day. And then, we had the meeting and whatever, it got over. But even after the meeting, I was still annoyed. Like, I couldn't seem to let the fact go that the day had changed, the meeting got moved, and I had the meeting, but I was still hanging on to the annoyance. And I was focusing on that. I was focusing on, why did we have to do that? Why couldn't it have been this way? I'm having these conversations in my mind, and I'm asking these questions, and I'm like trying to justify my annoyance to myself, which is an interesting thing in itself, because if myself is annoyed, like, why do I have to justify it to myself when I'm already there and myself already understands it, So I'm realizing that, like, what I'm doing after the thing is done, like whatever I'm annoyed with, like, it's like I'm looking back at the thing that's annoying me, and like, but I'm still moving forward into the future. So it's like I'm looking back, but I'm moving forward at the same time, and I'm looking back focused on what annoys me while I'm trying to move forward in the future. So as you can imagine, like on that day, like even into the rest of the day, I was annoyed. Like I was annoyed into the Friday evening, later into the night, and it kind of like, it set the tone for my night, right? It like, I don't say like ruined my night, but I didn't have a good experience of that in that evening. And when that happens, when you have something like that, where you're focused on something, like I was with the annoyance, and I was still annoyed that the thing happened, it changes how I feel, right? So I was feeling like shit. I was annoyed, like, and I was feeling like, even like across my chest, it was feeling like tight, and I was feeling like tired from having to keep being annoyed, and and then that's affecting how I'm behaving, because I'm not wanting to do anything. I'm just wanting to like lay around and stare at the TV. I feel like I have no energy, and I feel like I'm just like bleh, like just wanting to like just end the day so I can start a new day. And so, I share this example because what we focus on and how we focus impacts our lives so deeply, right? There's so much happening within our focus that often we don't even realize that it's happening, because it feels like all of these things are like glued together, right? Like what you focus on and what you feel, and then how you behave. Like, to me, I always felt like it was one unit moving together. And what I'm realizing from this course, and as I'm paying attention to my own self and having the awareness of my focus, I'm starting to see the breakout of that, right? Of the focus that I'm having, and the questions that I'm asking myself, and the way I'm talking to myself, and how I feel in my body is impacting how I behave. And the goal and the purpose of this, the purpose of why you would even want to start to pay attention to your focus and break this out, is so you can stop those patterns that feel so automatic, so that you can stop those things that feel like they're moving in one unit, and like that you have no control over, right? Because that's how it often felt for me. And maybe you can relate to that like you had no control, that like it just happened. And like, for me, it felt like I just had to wait for it to pass. And what I feel like this is doing, being more aware of your focus and how you feel and how you behave, is it's another one of those examples of how you can take your own control back, how you can get back in the driver's seat, because the focus isn't running wild all over the place and out of control. You've reined it in. And so now you're choosing how you're focusing. You're choosing on what you're focusing on, right? You're choosing to put the phone down when you start to see headlines that make you upset or angry or sad, right? You're choosing to put the phone down and step away and move on to something else that makes you feel better, that makes you feel good. And as I say in the course, it's more resourceful ways of focusing and thinking. And so when you're doing this, becoming aware of your focus and what you're focusing on, and really how you're directing it too, right? Because we can direct our focus in so many ways. You start to learn, like I said, how to take that control back. You're taking conscious control. And the really interesting thing also that I noticed about myself with focusing was, so I read something, there was something I was reading. I think it was like it was like a tip from like a newsletter about saving money or something like that, right? And the person gave the tip, and at the end they posted something about like, share this on Facebook or Twitter. And what I focused on in that tip, instead of the tip about the money saving tip, what I focused on was share this on Facebook or Twitter. And all I could focus on was, why is anybody still on either of those two sites? They, they're censoring people, all, they're blah, 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 all the stuff that's been happening with those sites. That's all I could focus on. And that was really interesting to me because I in my mind, I kept justifying, well, I felt fine before I read that little statement. Right. And then I started to feel angry and agitated and annoyed and like, questioning why anybody would do that. And I had to actually reel it back and like call myself out and be like, wait a minute, but that's the part that you focused on. Like you could have focused on the other part of the statement about the tip, whatever. I don't even remember what the tip was, some money saving tip, but you could have focused on that. But instead you focused on the part that annoyed you. And it's really interesting. And that ties back to what I was saying about being annoyed about that meeting getting moved and like not being able to let it go. Right. It seems like for me, like my focus has been like a magnet or like hones in on the things that annoy me. And it's like, but I don't have to do that. Right. I have a choice. I don't have to focus on that. And I think part of this understanding of our focus is getting to ask the right questions then to ourselves that move us away from focusing on those things that annoy us or the things that don't make us feel good. And so I wanted to share a few of those questions that I found helpful, that maybe if you're thinking about this and you want to try this week to be more aware of what you're focusing on, here's some questions that can help you get moving in the right direction, or not get, maybe it's more helping you call yourself out and like break the pattern of what your focus is, so you can start to break this apart for yourself and experience that and see what it feels like. Because the important part of anything that I talk about on this show, or really anything that you consume, is you have to be able to relate that to your own life, and you have to be able to put that back in, like you have to be able to understand what that means for you, because sometimes maybe the way I explain something isn't necessarily going to resonate with you. But if you hear it in another way, you can understand that, and then you can begin to experience it, and then you can understand how that's true for you. So here's some questions that'll help you hopefully become more aware of your focusing. So the first question I think is, when you start to feel bad, because sometimes we don't know we're focusing on something. So when you start to feel bad, maybe take it back a couple steps and ask yourself, okay, what am I focusing on this in this moment, right? And what feelings is this focus creating? Because asking those two questions can help you to, like I said, step back a little bit if you're already in the moment, or you're already in the feeling, or you're already in the behavior that isn't positive or isn't the behavior you want. Sometimes you have to dial it back and go back a couple of steps and understand how you got there. So asking yourself, what am I focusing on in this moment? What feelings is this focus creating for me? So really starting to understand what that feels like, or how you experience that in your body. Like maybe it's in your stomach, or in your chest, or maybe your shoulders like tighten up, right? Or you feel like the stiffness all through your body. And so once you start to pay attention to that, then you can ask yourself other questions like, so how do I know it's time to start feeling this way, right? If I feel this in my body, how do I know it's time to start feeling this way? You can start to go back a little bit. Okay, so what was I focusing on? How was I focusing on it? Like, how was I thinking about that? And whose voice is saying these things? Because oftentimes what I found, there's a voice accompanying whatever feeling I'm having inside, right? It's a voice that's in the back of my head that's usually not positive. And it's a voice that's saying things, unresourceful things usually. And when I ask myself, whose voice is saying these things, sometimes the answer is, it's other people. It's my concern that, maybe it's my mom's voice from how I grew up, or maybe it's the voice that when somebody said something to me that really bothered me, right? Sometimes it's not even our own voice saying these things that are then leading to the feelings and the behavior, right? So it's important to ask yourself, whose voice is saying these things to me? And where do I feel these feelings? As you're asking these questions, right? Where are you feeling these feelings in your body? And how is that impacting you, right? How is that like showing up for you in your body? And a good question I think to ask is this my strategy for staying the same? So is this process that I have about focusing on something that doesn't feel good to me, which then leads to feelings that feel terrible, and then leads to this behavior that I don't want? Is this my strategy for staying the same? I think that's a really interesting question. And being able to honestly answer that it's like once you start asking yourself these questions, it's almost like you start laughing at the things that you do internally to get yourself to stay the same, or to maybe because you're like really subconsciously afraid to change, or afraid to have the thing that you want. So is this my strategy for staying the same? And another good question is, what chance do I have of changing myself if I keep doing these things that feel like shit to me, right? These things that are unresourceful, or these things that I know don't work, right? What chance do I have of changing if I keep doing these things that I know that don't work, right? And that's like, again, I feel like when I ask myself these things, I start laughing because I see the ridiculousness of my behavior. And instead of condemning myself, can I react in a different way? Or can I have a different conversation with myself? Can I say something different? Can I change this pattern of thought to something different, so I'm not constantly sitting here beating myself up, or thinking the worst, or even expecting the worst that's going to happen? And I think another really good question to ask yourself and think about, and even maybe journal about, is what do I really want to have and do and be in this life? And is my focus getting me there? Right? So what do I really want to be, do, and have in this life? And is what I'm focusing on currently getting me there? I think you'll find that for most of us, myself included, the answer is no, because I'm not focusing on things that are getting me to what I want. I'm often focused on things that are taking me away from what I want, and having that awareness and bringing that awareness in and paying attention to that starts to shift these patterns that maybe you were not aware of that you have. So this week, as you move forward, I'm going to challenge you to pay attention and bring awareness to what you're focusing on and how you're focusing, and see if you can start to pay attention to what feelings your focus brings that then leads to behavior in your own life. And you might find that in some areas, your focus is awesome. You've got great focus, and you can do things that you love doing. But you may also find that you're doing things like I was with the annoyance, like focusing on things that were not helpful and were wasting a ton of energy and time, draining me internally, and also leading me to behaviors that I didn't want to do, that was taking me further away from the goals that I have and what I want to experience and how I want to experience my life experience my world in this life. So I think it's worth paying attention to what you're focusing on and how you're focusing. So I wanted to just bring that up this week. Like I said, it's something that I've been learning in this course I've been taking called Ever Better Life. It's been very helpful to me. So my intention with bringing this to you is that you'll find something here that you can use to start changing how you look at your own life. And so, so I think that's it for this week. If you have any questions or any comments, you can visit my website, sloanfremont.com. You can email me, sloanfremont@pm.me. And all the links are in the show notes to get a hold of me, to connect with me on social media, and to provide any feedback that you might have. So you've been listening to the Create What You Speak podcast, brought to you by webtalkradio.net. You can also hear the podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite podcasting platform. I'm Sloan Fremont, and I hope you'll join me for the next episode of the Create What You Speak podcast, where we will continue to free our minds, expand our consciousness, and untangle those thoughts and patterns that keep us from living the life we desire. Check out my website, sloanfremont.com, to learn more.